Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What are the scariest, most unsettling things that have ever happened in your life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. One day I was home from school from some kind of abdominal pain. I went to lie in bed and I felt something heavy just drop on the sheets between my legs. I looked, nothing was there. Nothing was on the ceiling that could have dropped either. My mom used to have nights where she'd wake up in the pitch blackness. There was always a streetlight shining through the window, and feel like someone was on top of her choking her too. That house was weird. Last year my family went camping at the same park we go to every year. Usually we also get to the same site, which is close to the bathroom and showers. This year we booked a bit late, and we were placed way out in the back of the park, which is a fairly secluded area surrounded by woods. It was a nice change, but a bit of a hassle. Lots of walking to go fishing, go to the bathroom, etc. The first night we were there, my nephew woke up in the middle of the night, woke up my sister, and told her there was someone outside the tent. She said something, then leaned up on the tent. He got scared and pushed back. She got outside, and there was nothing to be seen. We just dismissed it as a trash panda, even though my sister didn't think that was it. The second night, we had a few friends over. They brought their dog, who is the most well-behaved dog I've ever met, both with humans and other animals. We were all sitting around the fire when the dog started barking like crazy. She was tied to a picnic table sort of away from the fire or people. This was a super rare occurrence, so the owner got up to see what was going on. When he took the leash off the table, she went crazy and pulled him toward the forest. She actually pulled him a good 10 feet. He obviously wasn't expecting her to do that. She had never acted that way before. I decided to grab a flashlight and check out the forest in the direction she was pulling. There was nothing. She had seen squirrels, raccoons, cats, etc., and never has she acted this way. Everyone took note of how odd that was, but again, we just dismissed it as nothing. It did spark up a conversation about the thing outside the tent from the previous night, though. The third and final night we were there, we could see a storm coming in. The sky was lightening up, the thunder was loud, and the wind was crazy, obviously unrelated to the eerie events, but relevant to the story. We spent a good hour setting up tarps, covering the chairs, etc. Everyone crawled into their tents for the night, knowing that the storm was going to hit any second. I was the last to get in because I had to pee. I was at the edge of the site, facing the forest, pissing in the wind. The storm and the forest were spooky enough, but what happened next will forever be burned in my memory. From the forest, I hear the sound of a little girl singing, not like a fast-paced pop song, but a song with the tempo of a nursery rhyme. I couldn't make out any words, but I was certain I was hearing the voice of a small girl. There were no other voices. I pushed that pee out faster than a laser. The second I finished, I turned toward my tent. A loud bang of thunder sounded, and I jumped into my tent just as it started to rain. My heart was pounding. I was sweaty and possibly a bit covered in pee. Didn't get to shake the last drop. In the morning, I told my family. I feel like really no one believed me, but it happened, and it was terrifying. About 14 years ago, I was driving through Texas on my way to Denver in a car I had loaded up with my possessions. At around 1 a.m., somewhere just north of Amarillo, my car started to overheat, and I pulled into the only gas station remotely close. It was also closed, but I thought I'd bide some time and limp my car somewhere down the road. Other than this gas station, there was nothing and no one as far as I could tell. No cars on the highway. It was just really dark out with the lights all turned off and really quiet. After a while, the headlights of a car appeared, and as it came by, it slowed down and pulled into the station. The driver was a young guy with blonde hair. He rolled down his window and without looking directly at me, he asked if I needed help or even a ride. Right away I had a really eerie feeling. Also, the solitude didn't help. I was really polite and told him I was cool. My car had a problem, but I had something figured out, and I'd be fine. The kid said, "Sounds good, take it easy," and drove off while still not making eye contact. The car was still really hot, so I continued to wait it out. After a while, the guy came back and asked me again. I gave him a little more detail about my plan because I didn't want him thinking I was trying to mess with the station, just buying time. And I'd be on my way again. Again, no eye contact, and he pulled away. After about another 20 minutes or so, and just as I was going to get ready to move on, the kid drives back in. This time he asked me again if I needed help, but after I said thanks but no thanks, I noticed he was really getting agitated. Also at this point, the kid turned toward me. I could see this guy had no iris or pupils. His eyes were both solid white. Also, I had this sense of dread or fear that I can't say I've ever felt in my life. At the same time, he turned to me too. He was in the middle of telling me I deserved this for driving a Japanese car and that I was some kind of asshole for not letting him help me. At this point, I got in my car and noped out of there. He followed me for a bit out of the station, but turned around after about 1 mile. I was driving home from work. It wasn't a particularly back road type road, but not a highway either. Just a normal suburban road. Out of nowhere, a little girl runs into the road looking like she is chasing something. She's dressed in a dress with one of those fake little aprons on it. Sort of like something a little girl from the 50s or 60s would wear, judging from pics of my mom. She stops in the middle of the road and looks at my car and just vanishes. I had just been about to brake for her. It happened so fast. I drove that road every night for the rest of the year. I lived there and never saw her again. Still weirds me out though. Not the craziest thing compared to other things in this thread, but here goes. When I was about 18, I was living with my cousins in Maine. They have a Great Dane, and I'm familiar with the neighboring dogs. One night I was in the pool area smoking a cigarette. The pool area is surrounded by a fence about 6 or 7 feet high. It was dark, but there was an outside light on. So I hear a clattering, like paws on the fence. I look over. I'm about 15 to 20 feet from the fence. And something that looked sort of like the head of a deer had poked its head over the fence. Since it was dark, I assumed it was Jimmy, the Great Dane, and the only dog in the area capable of seeing over the fence. So I just say, "Hey Jim." Then I look in through the French doors and see Jimmy sleeping on the floor. Not really freaked out, but I turn back to look at this thing, whatever it was, and I can't quite make out what it is in the dark. There are coyotes in the area, but they wouldn't be tall enough to see over this fence. And whether it was or had a full head above the fence line. Like I said, it sort of looked like a doe, my antlers, but it would be very unusual for a deer to act like this. So I have no idea what it is. So without really thinking, I yell, "Bah, go away," to it. It hesitates for a second, still staring directly at me, and calms itself off the fence. This is also inconsistent with how a deer would behave, as they're quite skittish. I go to the garage and cautiously open the outside door and peek out to the lawn area where this thing would have been. And of course, nothing. So like I said, maybe not the craziest thing, but I still have no idea what it was that I saw. I was hanging around with some friends around a fire in an open area of a small forest near a beach. Lots of my friends were getting drunk or high, but I avoided it. I disliked the taste of the beer they were drinking, and I also don't want to smoke it. At around 11:30, I had to go home, and my friend went with me. We were all alone and started walking down a path out of the woods, and it was pitch black. Only the lights of our cell phones were used to help guide us. At one point, my friend said, "Hold up, stop. Turn off your light." And I did. I could faintly see his own outline right next to me, and he was pointing to somewhere in the woods off the path. The moon came out from just behind the cloud, and I could see what he was talking about. There was a man standing next to a tree. Defined head and shoulders and torso. I thought he was taking a piss, but it felt odd, and I was ready to get out of there. My friend shined his cell phone in that direction, but the light wasn't exactly far enough to see. But I swear it looked like the guy was facing us, staring. My boyfriend whispered, "All right, let's back off, come on." And suddenly there was a snap of a branch, and this guy was changing towards us through the foliage and tree branches. We sprinted as fast as we could and didn't look back. My friend later noted that when we got back to my house, he thought the dude looked like he had no legs, and he was sort of floating through the air straight. For us, I didn't get any good enough look. I just saw him jolt toward us, fast and moving quick. I was roughly 10 when this happened. My brother and I shared a room together, and I woke up pretty early one morning. The sun wasn't up yet. I looked around the room and saw the shelf that had a basket with a sweater on top of it. I thought to myself, kinda looks like someone is standing there. I knew it was just a basket and sweater because I saw them before I went to sleep. Then this figure moved closer to the side of the bed. It didn't have to move smoothly. I transitioned. It seemed to almost teleport in a way. It was made of 4 total movements to get the side of my bed, making no noise in the process. I got very scared and hid under my blankets and waited for about a minute or so. I lifted a part of my blanket to peek out and see if it was still there, and it was. It seemed hunched over as if it was peeking at me alone. I got even more frightened and hid under my blankets for a few more minutes. I peeked out one more time and it goes away. All I could hear from underneath my blanket and began turning my head to survey the room and saw it on my brother's bed, then mine. It seemed like it was looking at him now. Still terrified, I hid under my allies and blankets until the sun came up. I do not even have the slightest clue what the I saw that morning. I kind of like the horror movie behavior exhibited by some of the people in these stories, like, no, don't go down the cellar door, and don't dig out a hole in the ground, and don't do a lot of these things. But, it's easy to say while sitting here listening. In the moment, I probably would have done the same thing. So, anyway. A little late to the party, but here's my story. This happened a few months ago, and it was at the time very cold where I live. This caused me to have the heater on a very high setting in order to not freeze. I was lying in bed half asleep, and I felt someone sit down on the bed side beside me. I figured it was a friend or sibling of mine playing a practical joke. I look up to see a jet black figure sitting at the foot of my bed. This figure had no facial features of any sort. It was just a vaguely humanoid black shape. I saw through this. That was some kind of sick joke, so I slowly turned the lights on. This didn't change anything. The black shapes were still there, with no changes to the color. It was as if I was sucking the light out of the room. I reached out to touch the strange being, and it did not read in the slightest until my hand was mere inches from what would be the face. At which point, the shape began to flinch away. As I made a contract with the ceiling, my friend's and hand was consumed with the coldest sensation I have ever experienced. It felt like my hand was in liquid nitrogen. The creature emitted a shrill sound like a broken violin and then vanished. The strangest thing about this incident was that I wasn't the only one who experienced it. A neighbor told me that she had experienced the same thing at a similar time, and they were shrieking sounds that the cousins made was heard by other possible people nearby. I was the only one who touched the creature, but other victims reported that the shadow people vanished just after the loudspeaker. About 2 years ago, I was driving with my cousin on a paved road along the northern coast of Colombia. It was early in the evening and we were listening to music while chatting. On our right was the Caribbean Sea, about 100 feet from us, and on our left there were miles and miles of jungle and swamps. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a dog-like creature jumps in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, but I still managed to hit it. As I'm about to get out of my car, my cousin grabs my arm very hard and tells me to look at what it's in front of us. The thing I had just hit gets up, says, "Hiju puta, son of a bitch," in Spanish, stands on its 2 feet and sprints to the jungle. The creature looked like a large border collie and had a fanny pack strapped to its abdomen. I drove way above the speed limit until we got to the next toll booth. A lot of people have told me it might have been a witch. To this day, my cousin and I have no clue what the hell we hit. There's always been this one thing that always sat in the back of my head. When I was about 8 to 10, I can't remember really, but we were visiting my grandparents who lived about an hour away. After the visit, it's dark out now, we get in the car and start to head home, and I just started looking off toward the distance and see a tower that's still flashing bright, really bright. I thought this was normal, until it seemed to follow along with us, directly across a couple of miles away. I kept watching, and it seemed to grow in brightness. I mentioned this to my parents. They disregard it. 20 minutes in, we hit a wooden area and I calmed down, feeling safer now that I can't see it. 10 minutes later, back on an open road, it's still there, seemingly lighting up the rest of the night sky where it's flashing. This completely freaked me out, and even my parents noticed it. It seemed to get closer 5 minutes later, and my dad turned toward it, opposite of where our destination was. But he was intrigued by it himself. It seems to go away, scared by my dad's willingness to pursue it. I have no idea. To this day, I have no idea what it might have been. I'll never forget it though. I always look to see if I can find it again. Half of me wants to see it, half of me doesn't. It's probably going to get buried at this point, but this happened about 3 years ago. I went to a residential high school with people from all over my state. Over the summer, my 2 best friends, let's call them Dan and Ken, and I decided to get together at Ken's house. He lived pretty far away, 3-hour drive or so. So we decided to stay there a few days to make the most of the time. As it turns out, Ken regularly helps his local church by going in and cleaning up after service. Not sure if it was after Mass or a youth group or whatnot. So Dan and I agree to help, as it falls in a night we're there. Ken has told me a story in the past about this church being haunted. I'm a bit skeptical. To my right of the front door, and he heard children, there's a staircase to the basement to the right of the front door, and he heard children playing on the stairs one day. The kicker is, he was the only person in the building and had personally unlocked the door when he entered. He followed the sounds, and there was no one there. As I said, I was just a bit skeptical about the truth of the story, but it was entertaining nonetheless. By this time, we got to the church to clean. It was dark, but not too late in the evening. My friend unlocks the door and shows me and Dan the staircase in question. Ken goes off to the chapel to clean, and Dan and I decide to take a look. We went down the stairs and hit a light switch that illuminated the hole in the basement. Seeing nothing interesting, I turned the light off and headed back up with Dan. Here comes the weird part. We head back upstairs and hang out in the entryway for a few minutes before Ken comes back in from cleaning. "Yo, Max, two-steppin', do you mind turning off the basement light?" I turn, and sure enough, you can see the light shining up from where the basement, I definitely 100%, zero doubt anywhere, turned off that light the first time. I've never been more secure of anything in my life. So naturally, I walked downstairs, turned off the switch, and sprinted like hell back up the stairs. I don't think I've ever wanted to leave someplace that badly. Okay, without giving specifics, this is by far the creepiest thing that has happened to me. So I moved to this new place about 5 years ago to pursue better career prospects. While here, I began dating a colleague of mine. However, we were both living as paying guests in different houses at the time and were not allowed to visit each other according to house rules. So we pretty much spent all evening after work outside and only turned up to our rooms to sleep and wash. So, the room I stayed at was located in this old apartment complex outside a local train station. The elevator opened onto the 6th and 9th floors only. All other floors were accessible only by stairs. My room was located on the 7th floor, so I had to take the elevator to the 6th floor and then climb up the stairwell. It was very late, around 2 a.m., and after our usual nightly walks, my boyfriend dropped me off close to the building and headed off to his room. As I began to walk toward the lift landing, I had this eerie feeling of being followed, so I picked up the pace and caught the elevator going up. And when I turned around just as the doors closed, I noticed there was no one there. When the doors opened onto the 6th floor, I was still very scared and anxious and could not shake off the eerie feeling. So I ran up the stairs and opened the door to the apartment. It and I was taken then renting the room from an old woman and her daughter who lived there. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and the daughter liked to turn on the air conditioner quite high. So the old lady slept in the hall. So when I opened the door that night, I found the old woman asleep in the hall as usual. I quickly locked up and went to my room and thought nothing of it till the next morning. It was around 7 a.m. when I wake up to get some water. When returning to my room, I noticed a broom placed across the front door. Again, I thought nothing of it and went back to my room. When I finally got back out, the old lady was sitting on the couch, and she asked me what time I got in the previous night. I said it was late, around 2 a.m. She said she had dreamed that there was someone following me very closely and waiting to get into the house. And so she had placed the bedroom on the 1st floor to prevent that person from entering. We used to go camping with a group of families and our 4-wheeler drives once a year. This particular year, we toured through the Flinders Ranges in South Australia. We would usually drive all day, find a camp spot, camp for a night or two, and then move on. One of the days, we found ourselves driving through abandoned towns. Nothing significant, just a pub and a couple of houses, and then a dirt road again. We drive through a few of these towns, each spaced maybe a few dozen kilometers apart, until we reach the end of the road at another abandoned town. It's later in the evening, so we set up camp in the rundown caravan park. We're the only people for miles. We kids decided to go out exploring, and the first stop was the pub. There was myself, my brother, my sister, 2 other girls who were sisters, and a Japanese exchange student who was staying with the 2 other girls and their family. The pub was on the corner of the road and looked like your stereotypical outback pub, except it was dead. There was a cellar door that led below the pub and wasn't hindered by any locks or anything. We kept egging each other on, but we were all a bit too scared to go in. So we start heading back toward the caravan park. We get about 100 meters down the road and then notice this hole in the middle of this dirt road, maybe 15 centimeters in diameter. We all got curious and started putting things down it. Besides us was a pile of junk, and there was a wooden stake, maybe 1.5 meters in length, that went straight down the hole with no noise following it. We get more curious. We headed back to camp to grab some shovels to dig the hole out and see what it was. We spent the hour or so digging out this hole and sticking torches into it. By the time the sun had set, most of the others had gone back to camp, and suddenly it was just myself and the Japanese exchange student. We had dug out the hole enough to make out some of the features inside of it. It looked to be some sort of mineshaft. There was wooden supports, and it was about 3 meters deep. We keep digging. A few moments go by, and we hear footsteps, the crunch of dirt underfoot. The weird part was that they were coming from ahead of us, but our camp was behind us. We shined the torch up, and all we saw ahead of us, about 100 meters away, was this shadowy figure walking and disappearing behind this abandoned pub. Suffice to say, we picked up a piss, bolted back to camp, and found everyone there. Did not sleep well in the tent that night, that's for sure.